So the last thing I want to go over in terms of this workflow is environmental analysis. I'm going to go ahead and demo what I think are three of the core forms of environmental analysis that we use in landscape architecture. So I'll show slope analysis, drainage analysis, as well as solar analysis. And these will all be done through Grasshopper. So let me just go ahead and open up Grasshopper. In this case, I'm doing it through the command. I know we used the icon before. You'll see this is the old script we were using. This would be the TopoKit script that we were using, and we're going to keep working with the Landau land kit. This is a demo of not the pro version, so you'll see there's two types of topography analysis that we're able to do. I'm just hovering over them here. There's the elevation analysis, which will be not unlike what we had done in Cloud Compare earlier in this workflow. And perhaps more importantly, the slope analysis pieces function, which is quite nice. The one thing I didn't touch on in terms of this script that we had developed earlier on in the workflow is it currently is unnamed, unsaved, if you will. So once you've built out this script, I would recommend saving it. So just go ahead and I'll do the same here. I'm going to call this the land kit analysis. The land kit analysis, more or less, what's kind of nice is you can keep building on what you have here. So right now you may not necessarily want these previews. One thing that you can do to start to get rid of this, if this is looking a little bit too dense for you, is you can use your scroll wheel and hover over these outputs and start to hide them here. Depending on how far back we go. Let me just make sure. There we go. So that's, I think I had just missed the points function at the end. So all I'm doing is pressing down on that scroll wheel and going to the blindfolded person icon. What's kind of nice about that is this function is still running. And what you'll come to see as we move over and select, let's say, the elevation analysis, as well as the slope analysis pieces, the first input for us is the topo mesh. So we're able to, in some ways, keep building on this script, and we can demo these in a couple different ways. The first thing I'll do is show you the elevation one. The input at the moment, we're just looking for this topo mesh. So we'll just click here and pull over. And you can see now this mesh has changed. I'm in shaded view, but this is sort of what it looks like in the rendered view without those vertices interrupting the reading of this analysis. I'm going to stick in shaded view, however, but just to give you a sense of what that starts to look like. There's a couple different things we can do here. The one thing you may be interested in, sort of from an aesthetic standpoint, might be to modify the color. So you could double click and look for a swatch, color swatch more specifically. Plug that in. And what we can do here is double click on that and start to give this a different color. So you can see as I scroll through here, we get a kind of real-time update. And once we're happy with whatever color we're using, go ahead and hit accept down here. Just show this really quickly in our top view. rendered. So like I mentioned, not unlike the cloud compare function, relative elevation as we're moving down the, I guess it would be Wallingford neighborhood into the water. So that could be one of the first functions. Let me go ahead and split these screens for us again, just so we can kind of see what's happening in both windows. Because I would recommend, as we start to export these forms of analysis, you may want to generate some additional layers here for yourself. So if we know the first one is an elevation analysis, we can go ahead and do that. Elevation. Two ways that we can export this. One would be to have it selected, and there is a quicker way to bake the analysis. I had shown you the right-click, bake, and this allows you to choose the attributes of the bake, as in which layer. You could also hover over this, hit that scroll wheel, and hit bake, and it'll do it slightly quicker. In this case, it just uses the layer that you're on. So that would be one way to perform this function. So just to kind of see what's going on, I could take my simplified mesh and turn that off. Right click, select objects, and this is my elevation analysis. I can move it to the side. This may be slightly confusing because this here, I can't select it. This is still the preview mode of the analysis itself, given the contour and mesh inputs, but this is our baked out geometry. So hopefully that's not too confusing. If I hit undo, or if I was even to start to hide this analysis and move this over, eventually it would go away depending on how many inputs I undo, right? So there's that mesh hidden. This is to get it turned back on. This would be to turn this back on. And again, I'll just hit Control Z just to undo that. So that would be the first function. I would recommend just right-clicking on that component and hitting disconnect. So I'm just going to disconnect that mesh. Maybe I like that color, so I could just keep that. In terms of the slope analysis, can do sort of the same thing, right? We just take our mesh input. I might go back and just make sure we have our input geometry, our simplified mesh selected, and I'm going to go ahead and take our elevation analysis and just hide that using the light bulb. And so from here, what you can do is plug in this slope pieces analysis. The one thing that you're going to find with this component that may confuse you is it doesn't look necessarily like a great slope analysis at the moment. There is no real analysis. But when we hover over this, you can see that these steps, in terms of this is the input of this function, these steps actually correlate to slopes. So you can see here 2, 5, 8.33, 15, 25, 33, and 50. And those are slopes, right? They're, you're seeing the 8.33 may start to ring a bell for you. That's, the 1 to 12 ratio that represents ADA ramp requirements as sort of maximum slope. So these are inputs, but we're not seeing those yet as an output. And the way you can work around this is that you need the mesh and the colors to work together. So just double click here, and what you're gonna want to generate is a custom preview. The other thing you can start to do, if you're not sure what's going on sometimes, is you can actually take a panel and just get a sense of what the outputs are. So these are your color outputs. We could disconnect this. And let's see what kind of meshes get put out here. So what we see here are 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. So 8 total mesh outputs, which correlates to the amount that we see here. These are our steps. So what we know is there's multiple mesh outputs that are going to be generated from this. It's not going to be a singular mesh, and that's fine. Same thing, I would just disconnect this. We'll just hit the delete key to get rid of that function. Here for this custom preview, we have two inputs. We have the geometry preview, which will be our mesh. And you'll notice there's still no real distinction in terms of this color. Distinction in terms of slope analysis color. The way we're going to work around that is to use our colors, and we're going to input that into this function here, which is the material override. So connect those, and now you can see we start to have a more meaningful slope analysis, one that starts to correlate to these various steps. It's going to show this in our top view, and we'll go to rendered since it'll be a little bit more clear for us. And so now we can start to see this form of analysis a little bit more clearly. You can start to read the pathways, which is quite nice, you know, the switchback, these sorts of things that were graded into the landscape design. Same function as before. If we want to output this data, we can click here on this preview. Again, I would recommend make a new layer, and we'll go with slope. I'll select the slope. Again, just remember, if you're hitting the scroll wheel to do this quick bake, you'll want to be on that layer that you're trying to bake to. Otherwise, you're going to run into some issues in terms of layer management, these kinds of things. So let me go ahead and disconnect this component as well. I'm just right-clicking, disconnecting that mesh. So those would be two forms of analysis that we're using with the land kit. I'm going to go ahead and hide this preview just so we have a cleaner drawing space. Again, what you're going to notice when you click here now is a lot of different types of meshes, right? These are the 8 subdivided meshed regions. Really quick, what you can do here is take this simplified mesh, your input, and close that out. And you can go to rendered view just to make sure that's actually, your analysis actually worked and is rendered out. So the white, for instance, these would be nearly flat areas. We can do the same in the top view just to get a sense of what that's starting to look like. Having the meshes subdivided is quite nice. So in some ways you could go even further and start to subdivide these by slope, depending on what kind of analysis you're doing. So let's just say I want to only look at this slope here, these sort of close to pathway slopes. I can select those and just type isolate. And now I have an analysis of just a certain steepness of slope. So in terms of accessibility analysis that you may be doing in your studios or something, this could be super helpful in terms of preliminary site analysis. We are looking at a design site, so in some ways there's solutions baked in terms of how to navigate these slopes, but sort of an interesting function of this form of analysis. To get the rest of your work back, you can just go ahead and hit show, and that'll bring your work back. And what I may do now is go back to my simplified mesh, and I'm just gonna turn off the slope analysis. So those are two forms of analysis through LandKit. The other one I'll show on the LandKit front is in the water kit. Specifically this beta version of flow lines. And this is gonna be your drainage analysis. This one, the input can be a little simpler again. We don't need to worry about the preview, the sort of custom preview output. Our output here ends up being curves. So it just tells us here curves. So then we know we want to put a curve at the end of this. And that was just from hovering over here and reading curves describing the flow lines. Okay. And our input's still going to be that topo mesh. This may just take a second to load. It's slightly heavier. You can imagine there'll be a lot of line work generated. There we go. It's going to go to shaded view. It was actually easier to read in rendered. So rendered view, this is what you start to get with your drainage analysis using LandKit. Quite nice, you know, if I click here on our curve output, this will highlight it even better for us, and you can hop over into plan view. In terms of how you're representing these as an output, some of these may make more sense for you in plan versus AXO. These are decisions for you to make depending on your studio and your own design sensibilities. What's really nice about this one is you can start to get a sense of pooling. You know, for some of these areas that are more flat, you can start to get a sense of runoff moving into the water, as well as sheet flow. So these would be basically, I believe these would be gutters for roads. This is kind of what you're looking at, which is quite nice. So we can start to really read the landscape through this drainage analysis as well. So let's just go ahead and bake that out. We'll make another new layer here and we'll call this drainage. For this one, since the output is going to be a curve, I may just actually choose a color attribute. Blue feels intuitive. Right click, bake. In this case, I'm right clicking just because I don't have that layer selected. So drainage, there we go. May just take a second. Okay, great. I'm going to right click on this and just disconnect that input as well. So not unlike our save before, you may want to just save at this moment. You have all of these components already in this file. So you may as well save that. And so next time for any of your future projects, you have this ready-made Grasshopper script where you're able to move from curves to a mesh, use that mesh to take a look at flow lines, so drainage analysis, relative elevation, as well as slope on your site. From here, I just want to showcase one other form of analysis, which will be our solar analysis. I know I've shown 3 here, and I'm recommending you do 3. In my view, elevation and slope fall under very similar categories in terms of what we're interested in from a design perspective. I would argue that slope analysis is going to serve us a little bit better, but that's sort of up to you and your studio projects to make that decision about which forms of analysis lend themselves best to your workflow. I'm going to provide you with this next script. So look for that on the course canvas. It's called Solar Analysis. I'm just going to go ahead and hit OK on that. And what you'll find, the very first thing that's going to happen when you go to open that ready-made Grasshopper script is you're going to get this pop-up, and it says open.epw weather file. And so the EPW weather file I'm not going to provide you, and that really has to do with in the future you'll be practicing all over the place, and it's quite helpful to be able to search out your own EPW files so that you can start to contextualize your solar analysis depending on where you're working. EPW, by the way, is like an energy plus weather sort of file. So what I would recommend is just go to Google or whatever your search engine is and type in EPW. In this case, yes, Seattle. I'd recommend this climate1building.org. From here, you're going to go ahead and just scroll down. I tend to find it this way, so just climate files that are listed. We know we're in North America, region 4. We are in the United States of America, and more specifically, we're in Washington. So there's a lot of different files here, of course. What I'd recommend is just Control F and go ahead and just type in Seattle, just to expedite your search. I'd go ahead and do the Seattle Tacoma, use the most recent dates, so 2006 to 2020. You'll see there's some other ones like Bowen Field, but I would do this version here. That'll download pretty quickly. Let me just go to that folder. Right click, extract all, replace destination. Okay. All good. So we'll just make sure really quick here. Yeah, this is the EPW file. So we do have that file type. We can close out of that. Close this as well. And so now we'll just click on that folder and just link that EPW file. Hit OK. The one thing that may happen to you, and this could be the case for me, is sometimes when you're moving between analysis types, so in this case you can see I've just clicked on the side here to see what I have open. So I still have LandKit open. I'll close that, but I'm noticing this component is showing up in red, and I'm going to go ahead and try the inputs, but my sense, I've found this in the past, is that we're probably going to have to just close out of Rhino altogether. But let me just go to shaded view. I'll try it this way, but seeing that component is red without having even worked through my inputs, let me just hit clear values here, clear values here. Maybe it'll be okay. Let's take a look. So this may look like this for you at the start in terms of how it's open. You're all good on this side in terms of like the Ladybug import. One thing worth mentioning, if you're having a hard time installing these, I do know that in 440 you've covered some Grasshopper work, so I guess I'm assuming that this is obvious, but if you go to your components folder, this is where most of your information is. So this is where your Ladybug stuff would be. This is also where like the LandKit information gets dropped, for instance. So hopefully that's all straightforward. We can talk about that in class if you have questions about Grasshopper installation stuff, these types of things. But in any case, you'll want to zoom in near the end of this script here for the run sunlight hours analysis. And you'll have, I'm just going to turn off the drainage just because all those vectors all those curves are going to be pretty heavy. And we can just take a look here at add all surfaces to analyze. So we know that our surface, I'm just going to click that one open mesh, our simplified mesh, because that's what we want to analyze. Right click, set one geometry. We can just click on that just to be sure. So that's green. And then add shadow casting geometries. So for the purposes of this demo, I'm going to go ahead, I'm just holding shift to select multiple. I'm going to go ahead and choose those 4 extrusions, my buildings. You're going to have a lot more. I just only modeled 4 for the purposes of this demo. Right click And in this case, since we have multiple geometries, we'll just be sure to hit set multiple geometries. Yeah, so I think if you find that doesn't work for you and you get this error, I would recommend just going ahead and saving your file. So I'm gonna just hit File, Save. Save that file, and I'm gonna close out of Rhino and Grasshopper. I believe this is just some sort of strange lag that happens. And so maybe I'll just hit pause on the video while we wait for this file to save, and oh, it's saved. So I'll hit close. It's just mentioning that I didn't save anything from that file, from the solar analysis that I had modified. That's okay. I'm just gonna hit close on that. And we can open up Grasshopper once more. And let's see if this doesn't solve our problem. It's sort of nice in some ways to run into a lag or an issue. So I'll likely keep this in the tutorial on the off chance this happens to you as well. Let's go with Grasshopper. Just gonna split my screens. Solar analysis, APW. I think there's just a slight lag as it's loading this information. And I'll just have to set those parameters again. Once we have this load. So I do believe that, you know, it's already looking more promising just in that this didn't load into the red right away. I'm just going to right click and clear these geometries just on the off chance something's preset in a strange way. Again, just waiting on that lag. Seems to me, based on the lag time, this may work better. Okay, so I already have this geometry set, it seems like. I may just clear it really quick and we'll just reset it. So set one geometry. My sense is just based on the lag we're experiencing for this script right now that we're probably in a good place. This will work this second time. Depending on how long these lags are, I may just hit pause or skip through them, but maybe it's not so bad. This is one that you'll want to play around with a little bit in terms of your inputs and the amount of compute that it's going to take, you know, depending on the computational power of your computer. You could start to integrate trees as well if you find your machine is up for it, and that'll add some nuance in terms of the sunshade analysis. So let's go here. I'm going to set multiple geometries. So I'm just setting those 4 buildings for the purposes of this demo. I'm not going to put the blocks, the tree blocks into it or anything like that. And we'll see what we get once this analysis is finished running. Okay, so it's looking pretty good. I mean, it looks like nothing probably to you, but nothing's in the red. So I would just come over here and click on your analysis surface. And once you click on that, this will be your solar analysis. Tends to be quite nice to see this in your top view. Just remember that this is relative to only a couple attributes. It's relative to the input slope itself, and then it's relative to, in this case, these 4 input buildings that I had set. So that's the only thing that the input is responding to. So even these trees, if you added these would start to splay out and show additional shading attributes to this area. But you can see here, as indicated in the blue, some of these areas that are full shade, and in yellow what would be full sun. I'm just going to go ahead and move this to the side, just like we've been doing, just for the purposes of the demo, so that you can see everything. From here, what I'd go ahead and do is just add one more form of analysis here, and we'll do the solar. Bake that out. Okay, I'm gonna close out of Grasshopper, since that's really all we're gonna do in terms of the environmental analysis. Feel free to play around a little bit with some of the other ones in LandKit. If you see anything that interests you, by all means, you can swap out. But I hope this demo gives you a sense, at least in terms of how to work with those scripts in terms of inputs and outputs. I'm just gonna take a look at this in rendered view. And so you can imagine you could also start to combine some of these. So if you take like your sunshade and your drainage analysis, for instance, you can really get a sense of which areas might need certain planting types, for instance, in terms of little sun tends to get wet. So you have these sort of dark saturated soil conditions, if there is soil, or these like very dry full sun conditions. And in many ways, the existing condition as well as your design proposals together the design proposal itself could have another form of analysis just like this to start to inform other layers, such as planting design. In terms of how you want to output this work, this is sort of up to you. We're more interested at the moment in terms of just these computational workflows. So whether the output is a plan view, whether it's an axonometric, any of these kinds of things, they're very much up to you. One of the things we could start to talk about is just really quick, if you know, are you taking screen captures of this, or are you actually rendering it out? And one thing you could do, I'll just show like maybe our slope analysis as an option, and I'll just turn off everything else. Well, you see, do I have multiple layers on slope? Simplified mesh is still on. So if you're getting slightly confused with your layers, just make sure you have that first analysis mesh off. And so now I just have this slope analysis. Let me just make sure, select objects. Yeah. To render this out, I'd recommend, you can just use the Rhino renderer for now, unless you're using other things on your own machine, you know, such as like V-Ray or Maxwell or something like that. But I would just go up here to the render option, go to render properties. So I have a transparent background. Your DPI may be preset to 72 and like low quality or something. So just make sure you get this up to like a good quality, decent DPI. We're just going to be working with 8.5 by 11 sheet outputs for the submissions. So no big deal in terms of just sticking to your viewport dimensions and the very generous 300 dots per inch. You can start to play around with the skylight and the sun if you like. You could also just stick to this studio environment. We're going to go ahead and not render curves in this case, although you might imagine that through your drainage analysis, you may want to render curves in that case if you're not going to work with, let's say, like a make 2D function or something like this, which, given the amount of lines, may cause a lot of lag for your computer. So it might make sense to render even your curve information out. Everything else, I think we can be pretty happy with. We'll just hit OK on those parameters. From here, you can also play around a little bit with things like your lens length, if you like. So this is my camera. You can start to do really wide shots, like sort of more interestingly blown out. I'm just hitting Control and right click to do these other kinds of zoom. And it'll be up to you in terms of the composition of how you want to set this view when you're rendering it. Like even if it were to be more of a kind of quasi-plan, and how much of that extents you want to show. And from there, you can just hit render. So I'll just hit render just for the purposes of this demo. We won't wait for this to end, but just so you can start to see how that information can get put out. I have the background as transparent, so that's what you're seeing there. And so you can see the passes happening down here. I'm just going to hit stop on this. If you have additional line work that you brought in through, let's say GIS or ArcMap, ArcMap Pro, that may be nice to layer over top of this as well. From here, you're just going to hit save. If you want to keep that transparent background, just remember to save it as a PNG. But I'm not going to save this. Additionally, I'll just want to show you that you can start to overlay these, right? So if it was something more like this, we would just want to make sure in our render properties that we're rendering curves. We can hit render. Just a different view here to close out this final demo for this first workflow that we're going through. And so now you can start to kind of tell a story about the site through multiple forms of data sets overlaid. And I think that throughout the term, that'll be something that we'll want to come back to, is this overall narrative for your site and what you're trying to tell the viewer through digital media about your site. So views, composition, all these things matter. Okay, so I think you've got it. I'm going to hit stop rendering on this just to close out. And I'm not going to save it. Lag there. If you find this view, just a reminder that like we changed the camera lens length over in the properties, so this becomes pretty tough to draft like this. So just remember to switch this back to 50. That's the more like traditional drafting lens length, at least if you're in perspective versus your other projections, you know, like your isometric projections, these sorts of things, these views. So that ends the tutorial for this first, or series of tutorials for this first digital workflow. And we'll circle back next week with some photogrammetry work.